Let's revisit your promotion next fiscal year. We need you exactly where you are. That's what Bradford Keene told me after 17 years of building the system that pays his bonus. Not next month. Not this quarter. Next fiscal year. Again. I didn't argue. I just stared at the skyline behind his glass office and wondered how a man could see so much and understand so little. I still can't take my eyes off that horizon. Thinking how strange it is that I'm sitting here in a quiet Midwestern state, being told to wait another year of my life. Where are you listening from right now? And what time does your clock say? And stay with me, because that was the moment I stopped waiting. My name is Sadie Clark, Senior Director of Strategic Infrastructure, for 17 years. I engineered the risk architecture that quietly drives 70% of our company's revenue. I built the predictive models that shield us from market volatility. I designed the compliance protocols that kept regulators calm. I stabilized 3 revenue collapses and 1 executive ego crisis his. Every vice president in that room, I trained them. Every strategic deck Bradford proudly presents to investors, I wrote the framework. Every crisis that resolved itself, I was awake at 2 a.m. resolving it. And every year, I got the same polished corporate lullaby, "You're critical, Sadie. Just not executive material yet." Apparently, I was qualified to fix billion-dollar problems, just not qualified to sit at the table discussing them. During my final review, Bradford leaned back, hands folded, smiling like a benevolent monarch. "We need stability in your role. You're too valuable to move up." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Desperation is emotional. Leverage is mathematical. That night, I opened my laptop and sent my resume to the largest competitor in our sector. No dramatic music, no rage email, just a clean submission. 3 days later, I received an offer double the salary, executive authority, equity, that same afternoon. My company announced an aggressive IPO expansion plan, and for the first time in 17 years, I stopped waiting, because next fiscal year was finally here. Just not for him. Before we continue, I want to say this: some parts of this story have been dramatized with the help of artificial intelligence to sharpen the ideas and enhance the emotional impact. However, its core remains authentic enough to make a difference. I hope you'll listen to the end. And if not, that's okay too. Take a break. Your well-being is always more important than any story I might tell. I submitted my resignation the following morning, and I did it without trembling hands or dramatic pauses. Bradford Keene read the letter once, then leaned back and laughed. "You won't leave," he said lightly. "You're loyal." I placed the competitor's formal offer on his desk. Signed. Executable. Real. The laughter stopped. His expression shifted from amused to irritated in under 3 seconds. "That's a conflict of interest," he said sharply. "Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. No severance discussion, no transition plan, just ego wrapped in legal language." I nodded once, understood. He expected tears, or anger, maybe a speech about fairness. What he got was stillness. What Bradford forgot, what he never bothered to understand, was that the strategic oversight system I built included an executive continuity trigger. It wasn't dramatic. It was structural. If the designated strategic lead overseeing major enterprise accounts departed, clients retained the contractual right to initiate a risk reassessment window. I didn't design it for revenge. I designed it for stability. And stability doesn't negotiate with impulsive decisions. I packed my laptop, handed over my badge, and walked out without a backward glance. By the time I reached the parking garage, the mechanism was already in motion. That afternoon, 2 of our highest revenue clients sent formal notices to the board requesting risk reassessment meetings. No accusations, no emotion, just contractual rights being exercised. Bradford thought he had removed a problem. What he actually did was activate a clause. The market reacted faster than Bradford expected. Within 48 hours of my termination, the stock slipped 9%. Not a catastrophic plunge. Not yet, but enough to register as a crack in the glass. From what I later heard through former colleagues, Bradford opened the emergency board call with a steady voice. It's transition noise, he assured them. Short-term volatility, completely normal. Normal is a comforting word when numbers are still manageable, but legal had already reviewed the continuity trigger embedded in our enterprise contracts. The clause was valid, binding, and automatically activated upon my departure. There was no discretion, no executive override, once clients initiated reassessment. The window was open when that confirmation reached him. Bradford reportedly snapped. It's procedural, he insisted. Just paperwork. Paperwork that governed 70% of revenue. Meanwhile, 2 enterprise clients formally scheduled risk review meetings. A third requested documentation regarding strategic oversight changes. None of them sounded emotional. They sounded cautious. Caution travels quickly in capital markets. By the end of the second trading day, the 9% decline was no longer dismissed as noise. Analysts began asking questions during earnings previews. Why had the designated strategic architect been removed during active expansion planning? Why were reassessment clauses being triggered simultaneously? Then came the development Bradford couldn't spin away. A major investment fund, one that had been negotiating participation in our IPO expansion, announced it would temporarily pause capital deployment, pending further evaluation of governance stability. Pause is a polite word for doubt. That afternoon, a financial analyst on a widely followed industry call used a phrase that echoed through the sector: leadership risk exposure. Not market volatility, not operational delay. Leadership risk exposure. I heard about it through a quiet text from a former colleague. They're starting to connect it. 9% wasn't collapse. It was signal. The first visible fracture in a structure Bradford believed was immune to consequence, and fractures, once visible, invite scrutiny. By the end of the week, Bradford needed a villain, and I was too far away to yell at, so he found a safer target. According to the internal memo that quickly made its way to my phone, the recent volatility was attributed to mid-level instability. That was the phrase. Clean, clinical, convenient. Within 24 hours, 2 mid-level directors were terminated in what he framed as a demonstration of decisive leadership. Decisive is impressive when it's intelligent. It's reckless when it's defensive. Then came the second memo. This one referenced my departure directly. I was described as operationally replaceable. I read that line twice. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified everything. Replaceable people don't trigger 9% slides. I didn't respond. No public statement. No dramatic LinkedIn manifesto. Silence, when properly timed, is more unsettling than rebuttal. Instead, I focused on integration at my new firm. On Monday morning, I finalized a strategic advisory agreement with a regional enterprise client. It was entirely lawful. They had approached us. We disclosed everything appropriately. Compliance reviewed the documentation twice. The contract was signed before lunch. Bradford, meanwhile, escalated his narrative in a board update. He reportedly insisted the company was realigning operational layers to restore confidence. Realigning is a graceful word for scrambling. What he didn't realize was that scrutiny was widening. During the internal review triggered by investor concern, the board's governance committee began examining past promotion recommendations. That's when an older email surfaced, then another, then a third. 3 separate instances over 5 years in which senior executives had formally recommended my promotion to executive leadership. 3 times Bradford had declined. One message, written in his own words, read: Sadie is too valuable in her current function to elevate right now. We can revisit next cycle. Next cycle. The irony was almost elegant. The same decision he framed publicly as stability now looked like strategic negligence. Worse, it looked documented. I still said nothing, but documentation speaks fluently in boardrooms. What do you think about a CEO who fires others to protect his ego and calls the architect of his revenue replaceable, and if you believe he's heading toward a well-earned collapse? Tap the like button. Because every click helps push stories about accountability and real leadership further into the light. By the middle of the following week, the slide was no longer a fluctuation. It was acceleration. The stock closed down 19% from the day I walked out of the building. 19% is the kind of number that shifts conversations from optimism to liability. The board called an emergency hearing. From what I was told, the atmosphere had changed. No more talk of transition noise, no more soft reassurances about procedural adjustments. Instead, there were spreadsheets, revised projections, and pointed questions about why a key strategic architect had been removed during an expansion cycle that afternoon. My phone lit up with Bradford Keene's name. I let it ring once before answering. His voice was tight, stripped of its usual polish. "Let's fix this," he said quickly. "Name your number." There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, a transaction. 17 years was the number. I replied evenly. Silence. "You're being emotional," he pressed. "We can structure a compensation package, executive title, retention bonus." I almost admired the timing. He had discovered urgency precisely when the market did. "This isn't about compensation," I said. "It's about judgment. You're going to let the company suffer over pride. The irony didn't need commentary. You terminated me effective immediately." I reminded him. "That was your decision." He exhaled sharply. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said calmly. I stopped making one. I ended the call before he could pivot back to strategy language. When I returned to my desk at my new firm, I finalized a compliance review for an onboarding client. Business continued, structure continued, back at my former company. The emergency hearing reportedly stretched into the evening. 3 board members questioned the termination decision directly. Why was risk exposure not evaluated? Why were continuity triggers ignored? Why was succession planning non-existent for the first time? The conversation wasn't about volatility, it was about governance. By the next morning, I received a quiet message from a former colleague. 3 directors are requesting an independent investigation into Bradford's decision. 19% wasn't collapse. It was momentum. And momentum, once it shifts direction, rarely asks permission. Momentum doesn't cool down, it compounds. By the time the financial press picked up the story, the narrative had shifted from internal dispute to market risk. One headline circulated widely across industry feeds: "Strategic Architect Exit Triggers Structural Risk." That wasn't drama. That was diagnosis. The article outlined the continuity trigger embedded in enterprise contracts, the 19% stock decline, and the pending board investigation. It didn't speculate about sabotage. It focused on governance exposure. Investors read numbers, not emotions. Bradford responded the only way executives under pressure often do: optics management. Within 48 hours, he retained a national public relations firm. A polished statement followed, attributing recent volatility to competitive interference and transitional adjustments. Competitive interference, as if contractual clauses were espionage, as if clients exercising legal rights were part of a conspiracy. From my desk at the new firm, I watched the language circulate without comment. Silence remains more credible than rebuttal when facts are already public. Then came the 3rd enterprise client. They activated the renegotiation clause. Unlike the first 2 reassessment requests, this one carried financial gravity. The account represented a significant percentage of projected IPO expansion revenue. Their legal team formally cited material change in strategic oversight and scheduled renegotiation sessions within the contractual window. No anger, no accusations, just adherence to structure. Back at my former company, I was told the board's tone had hardened. Risk projections were revised downward again. Earnings guidance was being recalculated. Governance committees requested detailed documentation on succession planning protocols that, until recently, were assumed to exist. The PR firm issued another statement emphasizing resilience and long-term strategy. Markets rarely reward adjectives. Then the development that shifted the calculus entirely: the investment fund that had been positioned to anchor the IPO expansion formally withdrew from the deal. Not paused. Withdrawn. Their statement was concise: due to elevated executive stability concerns. We are reallocating capital. Elevated executive stability concerns. That phrase travels faster than press releases. The IPO expansion was effectively stalled. Liquidity planning began. Analysts updated risk ratings. The narrative was no longer about interference. It was about leadership exposure. And exposure, once quantified, doesn't respond to spin. Once the investment fund withdrew, the board no longer had the luxury of optics. They moved to structure. An internal review was authorized. And according to the updates I received, email archives were pulled in full. Everything. Search terms included my name, promotion recommendations, risk advisories, and succession planning notes. When scrutiny becomes procedural, it stops being personal. The first email that resurfaced was written 3 years earlier. A senior executive had recommended elevating me to executive leadership. Citing critical strategic dependency, Bradford's response was brief. Sadie is too valuable to move up. Too valuable. The second and third instances told the same story. Formal recommendations, documented warnings about concentration risk. Each time, Bradford declined. Each time. He emphasized continuity in my existing role. During the review session, the CFO confirmed what had been quietly discussed before my termination. He had raised concerns about strategic dependency on a single architect without executive redundancy. He had suggested succession planning or shared oversight. Those warnings had been acknowledged and deferred. When confronted, Bradford reportedly leaned forward and defended his reasoning. Leadership requires control, he said. You don't disrupt what's working. The chair of the board answered without raising her voice. Leadership requires foresight. Control preserves the present. Foresight protects the future. The difference was no longer theoretical. It was measurable in stock price and capital withdrawal. The review expanded beyond emails. Governance documentation was requested. Performance evaluations were compared against compensation decisions. Board members questioned why risk mitigation planning had not accompanied expansion announcements. The tension inside that room, I was told, was not explosive. It was colder than that. Directors asked precise questions. Answers were recorded verbatim. No one interrupted. No one joked. Then came the moment that altered the tone entirely. The company's founder, long retired and publicly silent, issued a brief statement through an industry publication expressing concern about executive judgment and its impact on legacy. Legacy. Bradford had used that word often. Now it was being used about him. Concern from a founder is not symbolic. It signals fracture at the top, and fractures at that level rarely heal quietly. By the time the founder's statement circulated, the market had already delivered its verdict. The stock closed down 28% from the week I left. Not rumor, not speculation. 28% of shareholder value erased under the banner of control. 2 senior directors submitted their resignations within the same 48-hour window. Their exit letters cited strategic uncertainty and leadership instability. Executives at that level don't leave because of gossip. They leave when risk becomes structural. Then the fourth enterprise client paused contract renewal discussions. They didn't terminate. They didn't accuse. They simply postponed signing until governance clarity was restored. In capital markets, postponement is pressure. Bradford responded exactly as predicted during what would become his final board session. He framed the unraveling as coordinated sabotage. He referenced competitor timing, media narratives, internal leaks, anything but sequence. I was told his tone sharpened as the numbers were presented again. 28% decline, 4 enterprise disruptions, withdrawn IPO anchor capital, executive resignations, markets overreact. He argued, "We are being targeted." The chair responded with a single question by whom there was no credible answer. From my office across town, I finalized another onboarding strategy call. Growth doesn't pause for drama. Inside that boardroom, however, the conversation had shifted from volatility to accountability. Legal counsel outlined fiduciary responsibilities. Governance committee members referenced the documented promotion denials and ignored risk advisories. The founder's public concern was read into the record. No one raised their voice. There was a vote. It was conducted by confidential ballot. No applause, no theatrics, just procedure. Effective immediately. Bradford Keene was removed as Chief Executive Officer. The public statement, later that afternoon, used neutral language leadership transition, interim oversight, commitment to stability. But everyone in the industry understood what it meant. Control had been replaced, and for the first time since this began. The market stopped accelerating downward. The morning after Bradford's removal, my inbox was unusually quiet. Markets had stabilized. Commentary had softened. The noise had thinned into analysis. That was when his email arrived. No subject line. 2 sentences. "You destroyed everything." I read it once, then again. Not to absorb blame, but to measure perspective. Destroyed implies aggression, intent, strategy aimed at collapse. I hadn't done any of that. I left. I didn't respond. Silence. At that point, wasn't restraint. It was clarity. There was nothing to debate. His decisions had unfolded exactly as documented. Markets react to structure, not sentiment. Later that same afternoon, Daniel, the managing partner at my new firm, asked me to step into his office. No drama, no theatrical congratulations, just a measured conversation. "We'd like to formalize your role as partner," he said. "Equity participation, strategic oversight, not a rescue, not a reward for chaos, an acknowledgement of value." I accepted with the same calm I had used when resigning weeks earlier. No victory speech, no backward glance. The following quarter's financial report from my former company was published 30 days later. Buried within the executive summary was a line that felt almost clinical in its precision revenue contraction, attributed to executive miscalculation during key strategic transition. Executive miscalculation, not sabotage, not interference, not mid-level instability, miscalculation. The phrasing mattered because it reframed the entire narrative in neutral accounting language. Investors understand miscalculation. It implies agency. That evening, a former colleague sent me a screenshot within 24 hours of the quarterly report. Bradford's name had been removed from the company's leadership page. No farewell message, no tribute paragraph, just absence. Websites update faster than reputations recover. I closed my laptop and stepped outside into the evening air. No celebration, no anger, just equilibrium. He said I destroyed everything. The numbers said otherwise, and numbers, unlike ego, rarely exaggerate. A month after the quarterly report reframed everything as executive miscalculation. I stood on a stage at an industry governance conference. The topic was leadership resilience. The irony wasn't lost on me. When the moderator asked about corporate loyalty, I answered without hesitation. Loyalty without reciprocity is exploitation. The room went quiet. Not because it was controversial, but because it was measurable. Markets had just illustrated the difference. I didn't sabotage my former company. I didn't leak documents. I didn't coordinate exits. I resigned. I accepted another offer. I complied with every contractual obligation. Structure did the rest. Bradford collapsed under the weight of a belief that power equals permanence. He assumed indispensability because he occupied the corner office. He mistook authority for insulation. The flaw wasn't arrogance alone, it was miscalculation. Correction followed naturally. At my new firm, the partnership papers were finalized without spectacle. Equity transferred, governance responsibilities expanded. I now sit in rooms where strategy isn't filtered through ego. Stability here is deliberate, not decorative. I didn't walk away to watch something burn. I walked away because staying would have meant endorsing imbalance. Markets dislike imbalance more than they dislike change. Bradford believed he was irreplaceable. The board replaced him in a single vote. Investors reallocated capital in a single statement. A website updated in less than a day. Systems are loyal to performance, not titles. As I stepped off that stage, someone asked if I felt vindicated. No, I felt aligned. I didn't sabotage the company. I stepped aside. The market handled the rest. I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because I finally understood the math. 17 years of loyalty without growth isn't dedication. It's deferred self-respect. The practical lesson here isn't dramatic. It's disciplined. Document your value. Put your impact in writing. Understand the contracts you sign and the systems you build. Emotion feels powerful in the moment. But leverage is what protects you when the moment passes. There's also something quieter beneath the strategy. I stayed too long because I believed endurance proved character. But character isn't proven by how much you tolerate. It's proven by when you decide enough is enough calmly. Deliberately. Without burning the building down, I didn't need revenge. I needed alignment. And once I chose it, the rest followed. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have stayed for another next fiscal year? Or stepped away before it cost you more than a title? And by the way, what's the temperature where you're listening from right now? Cold winter air or warm afternoon sun? Different climates. Same decisions. If this story resonates, consider subscribing. One subscription helps this message reach someone who still thinks silence is their only option. A like or share might help someone realize they're allowed to choose growth. When you engage, you're not just supporting a channel, you're quietly helping someone out there realize they deserve better. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.